Hey all, and welcome to Sorella Studio. I'm Ashley, the owner and creative director of Sorella Yarn, a hand-dyed yarn company from North Carolina. Today we are going to be dyeing a colorway called Sleeping Beauty's Castle, which is from our upcoming Disneyland inspired collection. So let's dye it. So this is Sleeping Beauty's Castle. It is kind of between a tonal and a variegated yarn. There's lots of different colors in here, and it's mostly overall purple, but there's no purple dye in this recipe. So I'm going to show you how we make this. And we're going to start with our bare yarn. So I have that over here that's been soaking in just some water. I'm using our Classic DK base yarn. It's 100% superwash merino yarn. It's a regular DK or weight 3 yarn. I love this one for knitting and crocheting. It's just really versatile, and it's a great workhorse yarn for any kind of project. You could do blankets, you could do shawls, you could do sweaters, literally anything you can use DK for. So that's why I love dyeing it, because it's what I probably would use most often. So I'm going to take my rings off and get my gloves on so that I can get started with the dye. So I'm going to keep letting my yarn soak over here. So I'm going to put my yarn to the side and I'm going to grab my dyes. So I have them all prepped here and ready to go. These come to us as powder dyes, and we mix them into a really concentrated dye stock solution. So that's what I have here. I'm working with 2 dyes today. I'm working with a blue and a pink. That's all we need to make this colorway with all the varied tones within it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I have my tray pan here. This is just a shallow pan that we use to dye all of our yarn, and I'm going to add the blue dye to the pan. It already has a little bit of water in it, and then I'm going to mix that around. I want to make sure to get as much dye as possible, just so that it looks as much like the other skeins that I have as possible. We measure all of our dye stock out to the 1/10 of a gram, so it's all very exact, and we stir a lot to make sure that everything is as even in the pan and there's no clumps of dye or pockets of more concentrated dye. We want it to be really even and smooth, and that's how you get a lot of the color change that you see throughout just one skein of yarn. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and mix up my second dye solution, because once I add the yarn to this pan, I'm going to want to pick it up and add the other dye pretty quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and get my other one ready. I'm going to use both of these. They look red, but they're pink dyes. So that's one. What we're doing here is 1 part blue and 2 parts pink to get the right tones that we want to see. And then in my last little jar here, I have a solution of citric acid, which I personally like to call pixie dust, because it's kind of magical. It makes all of the dye bind to the yarn and makes it not wash out when you wash your finished knit or crochet items. So that also comes in a powder. I've just melted it down with some hot water and let it cool. So I do need to top this off, because the water levels of our pan is very important for how much dye is going to move around when our yarn is inside with it. So I'm going to just top this off with some water. So now I have my second dye stock solution. I'm not going to add this yet because I want to get just that blue on the first side of the yarn before I add my pink. So I wanted to share a little bit about why I'm making this colorway and why we're doing the Disneyland inspired collection. I grew up going to Disney World and Disneyland as a kid, and it's just something that I feels very nostalgic for me. It brings back a lot of very happy family memories from when I was little, and it just makes for really pretty and inspiring yarn. It gets me excited about knitting and crocheting with every colorway imaginable based on all of these attractions and all of these childhood memories that I have, and the Sleeping Beauty's Castle colorway is kind of the one that started all of this. It was the first colorway that we made that was inspired by Disneyland, and it's just been a really special one for me. So I'm really excited to show you how we make it today. It hasn't really changed much since we first developed this recipe in 2019. So I'm just going to get my bare yarn very gently out of the water here so that I don't make a mess. If you haven't seen hand-dyed yarn before when it's in process, it comes to us bare and it comes in these big long hanks. So I want to get as much water as possible out of this because it's going to soak up a bunch of water and dye. I'm going to shake it out to kind of loosen the strands a bit because they're wet, so they stick to each other quite a bit. And now is the really fun part. I'm going to lay it in. I'm going to lay this in really slowly so that I can make sure it's going exactly where I want it to. And because this skein is bigger than my pan, I have to kind of scrunch it a little and spread it out. We use these zip ties on the yarn to keep it from tangling while we're processing it in all the different stages that it goes through, from winding to washing to dyeing. We use these zip ties, which are really helpful. They're reusable, which is great, but sometimes they can cause bare spots, which is why we have to pay special attention to getting the dye around those bare spots. So you'll notice that we still have some undyed yarn here. That's because we're going to use our pink. So although not all of the blue dye has exhausted yet, this is the magical part. We're going to lift this back up and out. I'm going to flip it, let it drain just a bit, and I'm going to add in my pink. And right now it's kind of a blue-pink kind of cosmic mixture, but when I start to swirl, it's going to make a purple from that very little residual blue left in there, and then the new pink that I've added. Now I'm going to flip and lay this in very slowly again on the other side, so that now those pink tones and the purple that it mixed to make is what's going to dye all those bare spots that were left on the other side of the yarn. I'm going to take extra special care to make sure that we don't have any bare spots. I'm only using 2 skeins in this big pan so that I have plenty of room to move the yarn around, and so that I can make sure that every little bit is getting dye on it. I can get in and around those zip ties, and I can just really kind of mix and move this yarn to make sure that we have dye everywhere. When you have too many skeins in the pan, we learned this early on in our dyeing journey, sometimes they get too squished and then the dye can't really move in there. So that is the Disneyland inspired colorway Sleeping Beauty's Castle. This one will be available for pre-order this Friday, March 3rd at SorelleYarn.com at 8 p.m. It'll be available on 14 different base options, every weight from lace weight all the way up to bulky. Really, any project that you want to make with this colorway, you are able to by pre-ordering that yarn. And it's going to look like this when it's finished. And we have lots of pattern ideas on our website, as well as over 20 more colorways inspired by Disneyland and all of the attractions and the nostalgia there. I hope that this video was inspiring for you today on your maker journey wherever you are. I would love it if you would give this video a thumbs up so that we know we should make more Sewrella Studio dyeing style videos. Also be sure to subscribe to see all of the videos that we have coming up this year.